Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on what coast you're on. Welcome to the Restaurants Canada webinar, a fresh look at frozen seafood. My name is Roberto Sarju, Director of Marketing here at Restaurants Canada, and I'll be your moderator today. Today, we're going to be learning how seafood can be the solution that exceeds customer expectations and can potentially generate substantial profits for your operation. This webinar will provide insights on the technological advancements in preserving seafood to keep it at its highest quality, how you can reduce and even eliminate waste, which can save you money, reduce your carbon footprint on the environment, and bring consistency to your menu. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's session, Corporate Chef for High Liner Foods, Philman George.
Hey. Thanks, Roberto. Thanks for having me, man.
Thanks for being here.
Right on.
Philman is no stranger to seafood, with both of his parents hailing from the small Caribbean island of Barbuda, which we just spent a while talking about. It's a little cloudy here in Toronto today. So we were just talking about the sunshine and the cool breeze. He learned to appreciate the seafood at a young age. He shares his passion for and love for seafood with Canada's most trusted seafood company, High Liner Foods, where he's the corporate chef for the last 5-6 years, is it now?
Yeah, 6 years. Wow.
Thank you for being here today again.
Yeah, no worries, man.
So before we get started, Before we get started, just want to give you a heads up. You can submit your questions by typing into the questions area of the control panel. You may send your question anytime during the presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available in a few days, and all you hear today will be sent a link to the webpage. Finally, if you would like to follow along on Twitter, we are at RestaurantsCA, and we are live tweeting today's webinar using the hashtag RestaurantTips. With that said, I'd like to turn it over to Philman to give us a fresh look at frozen seafood.
Oh yes, this is a fantastic topic to talk about because, you know, the elephant in the room, before we could even talk about all of the advantages of frozen seafood, we kind of got to address that elephant of frozen seafood being perceived as not being fresh. And you know, I grew up, you know, I'm close to 40 years old now. I'm going to be 40 in September. Yeah, the big 40. So I'm an 80s baby, and you know, the chefs that trained me, you know, I earned my stripes by listening and apprenticing and hands-on approach, fine dining, you know, the classic pub, all the way up to hotels and even running my own catering business. And throughout it all, I heard things like this, you know, the fish at our restaurant was flown in today from wherever. It could have been Norway, Ireland, from the Caribbean, Portugal. We never purchase frozen fish. We're all hear quotes like this, like, I have a relationship with the local fishers. We take trips to our local fish market every day. When the boat pulls in, I'm one of the first in line to select my seafood because frozen seafood simply is not fresh. Why does this perception exist? Well, as chefs, you know, we've been classically trained to get the freshest products available for our creations. You know, when I was apprenticing and when I was in culinary school, I actually recalled we never really worked with frozen seafood. It just wasn't an option. You know, I'll give you a little story about my perception of fresh seafood. I'm from an island in the Caribbean called Barbuda, which we just talked about. It's the sister island to Antigua. Everybody knows about Antigua in the Caribbean, but we're the sister island. We're the forgotten island. But we kind of like it like that. We're small, quaint, it's untouched and unspoiled. And one of the things, our biggest resources is the ocean. We depend on the ocean for our livelihood. And that lagoon that you see there on the left side of Barbuda looks like a really big swimming pool. That is where we get all of our seafood. It's some of the best fishing grounds in the world. So in Barbuda, there's no fish market. So if I want fish, I literally have to call my uncle or a cousin who's a fisher, and they will go into the lagoon at nighttime, set their nets, and then they'll tell me to meet me at the dock first thing in the morning. I'll go to the dock, the boat pulls in, I went up to my cousin, he opens up this cooler, and I select the fish that I need. I usually take just enough to get me through the day and maybe the next day, and then I'll place another order. So that's how we get our fish in Barbuda, and that is my upbringing with freshness. That's what I consider fresh fish. It was caught that day, and that's the time that we use it. My father is still in Barbuda, and he has a beach bar called Uncle Roddy's. Right, it's a little tiny beach bar. It seats about 30 to 40 people. It's about 50 steps from the ocean. And if you want to have, he has 3 things on his menu. He's got his classic famous dish is his grilled lobster. grilled spiny lobster that comes from the lagoon. He also has a barbecue chicken that he has on his menu, and he has the catch of the day. And it literally is that. It was caught that day. So if you want fish, and you want to be guaranteed fish, you have to order your fish in advance. You have to make your reservation, say you want fish, and he'll do the same thing that I did. He'll call up uncle or cousin and meet them at the dock, or they'll deliver it to his restaurant, and then he'll use that as the catch of the day. That is our experience with our perception of fresh fish. Now, unfortunately, my father's beach bar doesn't exist anymore because of Hurricane Irma. If anybody remembers Hurricane Irma that hit the Caribbean, the largest storm in the Atlantic ever recorded, wind speeds of well over, wind speeds that they couldn't even calculate anymore. It was like 5 hurricane magnitude 5+++. It just went off the Richter scale. So Barbuda was actually one of the only islands that had to be evacuated after Hurricane Irma. So everybody had to leave the island, and we all went to the sister island of Antigua. And my father had just, obviously he lost his restaurant, he lost his house, but everybody was, we didn't lose that many lives, so that was the beauty of it. So I said, okay, I got to make my father happy. I got to go down and figure out a way to cheer him up. So I went to Antigua, and I went to the local fish market in Antigua, and I've got a relationship with that dread that you see there. It's got like a sock on his head, right? That's my fisherman. I anytime I go to Antigua, I link up with him. He opens up his cooler, and I select the fish that I need, grab the fish, take it back to the place I was staying. We cleaned it up, and then I invited my father over, right? And we had a little fish cook up. And this is what we like to cook up outside, and this is our coal pot. So our coal pot is literally like a tire rim filled up with coal, light it up, and you heat up the oil. You season your fish because the fish is so fresh. You don't really need to do all these crazy spices. A little bit of salt, pepper, put some maybe some fragrant herbs, some thyme, some ginger in the belly, fry it till it's crisp. And there's me and my dad. Weeks after Hurricane Irma, my dad's got a smile on his face, because one thing that can make a Barbudan happy is fresh fish. And that is, I think that's one of the reasons why we're in this business, is those escapes from reality, right? Where you can 3 times a day, you can sit down to a meal and just forget about everything. And I was really happy that I was able to just go down there, fry some fish for my dad, and just see him forget about Hurricane Irma. So how do we capture that freshness? How do we preserve that moment in time? Because when you look at the word fresh, it really is, it's a definition that's different to everybody. But for me, it's a moment in time when a product was at its peak. That moment in time for seafood is when it's just pulled out of the ocean, when it's just harvested. So why don't we look at frozen seafood as a way of preserving that moment? Well, for that, you got to look at the history of freezers in general, right? And understand that freezers really went into mass production for residential use in the 1950s and 60s. So that means that my father would have been the first to really own a freezer in our family, and his grandfather never owned a freezer, right? So in culinary terms, the chefs that trained you and I grew up without freezers, right? So when freezers were first introduced, of course, one of the first people to utilize the freezer on a residential level was your local fishmonger. Your local fishmonger it was perfect, a perfect tool for your fishmonger, because the catch of the day would be displayed on ice. You would go to your fishmonger, select the fish that you wanted, boom. But if the fish didn't sell that day, okay, put it back in the fridge, put it back on ice the next day. Fish didn't sell that next day, okay, we got a little problem now. Okay, we got some old fish now. So what do? Wow, they've got this new thing called a freezer. We'll just put it in there. Remember, this is how the freezers looked back in the day, this old chest freezer, right? And the technology actually hasn't changed that much. At the end of the day, this freezer will go to -18, and you put your products in. You've got to wait a good, depending on how much products you put in there, probably almost a day for it to get rock solid, right? This method of freezing is what we call traditional freezing. It's a slow method, and what happens is, the basic science of water is when you freeze water, it expands, right? And the longer it takes the water to freeze, the more it expands, okay? So what happened with the fishmonger there is, first of all, 2 things. You were working with old fish to begin with, and then you put it into this traditional method of freezing. So when the customer comes to take that fish, take it home and thaw it out, those large ice crystals that are formed within the fish, once you thaw it, you can start to see that the flesh of the fish is very loose. Okay, the texture is different, the color is different. This is all because of the traditional slow freezing method. All right, so fast forward to today, and we've got something like this. This is what we call a tunnel freezer, and these come in various different sizes. They're small enough to fit on a boat. They're big enough to take up an entire room. A tunnel freezer can freeze seafood from ambient temperatures right down to well below -18. In fact, a tunnel freezer can go to temperatures of -27 and below, right? And why we call it a tunnel freezer is literally it's like a wind chill factor, right? Anybody living in Canada, we know all about wind chill. It could be -18 outside, but when you factor in the wind, whoo, wow, you're getting hit with a cool, intense breeze, right? So the beauty of the blast freezer now is you can take seafood and freeze it within minutes, and this now eliminates, it doesn't completely eliminate, but it reduces the ice crystal formulations, right? It won't form as big. They will be micro ice crystals instead of macro ice crystals. So the texture, the flavor, the color, everything is preserved when you use a tunnel blast freezer. All right, so blast freezing technology has gotten to the point where we can actually put it on the boat, on the vessel itself. And you will hear a term called flash frozen. If there's anything I want you to take away from this seminar, it is this term right here, flash frozen. And the definition of flash frozen is an item that was quickly frozen on board the ship or at the processing plant within hours after being caught. Sometimes you refer to this as IQF, individually quick frozen. So we go back to that you know, perception of my perception of fresh fish, that moment when it was pulled out of the ocean. This is now a way that you can preserve it. Flash freezing, and it happens directly on the boat, which is incredible. So all of our products at Highland are actually flash frozen on the boat. So literally, as soon as they come on the boat, they're frozen. And this process, from the time that they're caught, pulled on the boat, to the time that they are processed and flash frozen, we're talking hours, right? Instead of days, hours. Okay. Of course, we're Restaurants Canada, and I started to look around Canada for examples of chefs that were using frozen seafood that did it in a fast casual concept. Because we know, as Restaurants Canada tells us through the surveys and whatnot, that fast casual is one of the growing concepts, platforms for all food right now. And I looked around for some for some seafood fast casual concepts that had at least a dozen or, you know, close to 20 outlets across Canada. So I can go to Nova Scotia, I can go to BC, I can go to Saskatoon, and I know that, you know, this brand is going to give me fast casual seafood. I couldn't find any, right? But and anybody on listening to this webinar, if you know of any, you know, 10 or 12 units that are just doing fast casual seafood, please let me know. I'd love to meet those operations, meet those chefs. But in the States, there's a few chefs that I'm keeping an eye on that I'd love to share with you. One is the California Fish Grill, and Chef Louis Jacqueson has a fast casual concept, all focused on seafood, giving you sustainable choices, whether it's farmed, wild caught, whether it's chilled or whether it's frozen. And he has no problems telling you that, you know, his concept is built around giving you the freshest fish, but he also doesn't mind telling you that we serve frozen fish, because this quote from Louis is, sometimes frozen is fresher than fresh because it was frozen within hours after harvest. Another one that you might want to check out is slapfish. And, you know, Chef Andrew Gruel, his tagline for slapfish is, I'm going to slap some fresh in your face. That is the tagline for slapfish. So they are all about serving sustainable seafood. Fresh is their motto. And this quote from Andrew I thought was great. When seafood is properly frozen, it's better than its fresher version. You're basically pressing pause on time when you freeze something properly. And I think that's a great way to sum up what we've just talked about. It's all about properly freezing versus that traditional slow method of freezing. And it's unfortunate because sometimes, you know, restaurants are spending a lot of time and effort getting chilled seafood into their establishment, flying it in from all parts of the world. And then when it doesn't sell quick enough, they're just wrapping it up and putting it in the freezer, kind of like that fishmonger did many years ago. So, you know, there's ways to get beyond that, and that's what we're going to discuss right now. quality frozen seafood. What are the benefits? Well, this one I think is probably the biggest advantage for frozen seafood. I want you to do something. If you're using chilled seafood right now, and there's no issues with that, but call your fishmonger and ask your fishmonger for 4-ounce cod loins. Okay, now the loin of the fillet is the top part of the fillet. It's like the filet mignon of the fillet. It's the creme de la creme. It's the best part of the fillet. Tell your fishmonger that you just want that part, and you want it cut to 4 ounces, and you want 10 pounds of it delivered today, and another 10 pounds delivered on Friday, and then you want some 3-ounce haddock tails as well delivered on Saturday. All right? Call your fishmonger and ask that fishmonger for that. Your fishmonger is basically going to laugh at you because the fishmonger has no way to use up the other pieces. You take the best part of the fillet. What do you expect me to do with the tail? What do you expect me to do with the center cut? Right? So the beauty of frozen seafood is, man, if you're looking for that 4-ounce creme de la creme loin of whatever species, no problem. If you want the tail, if you want just the whole fillet and you want it cut to a certain size and dimension, frozen seafood allows you to do that because we can utilize everything for other products that we're creating. So that is the huge advantage with frozen seafood. And even better than that, you can lock in pricing for an extended period of time. So you can say, hey man, I want that 4-ounce cod loins, and I want that price that you're giving me today, I want to lock it in for an extended period of time. Absolutely no problem. Frozen seafood can help you do that. Frozen seafood also reduces your carbon footprint because when you're dealing with seafood that is chilled or just laid out on ice, that seafood has to get to its destination as quick as possible. So wherever it was caught in the world to wherever your restaurant or establishment is, it's got to get there as quick as possible, and that is usually using air freight. Okay, so with frozen seafood, we're preserving it on the boat. We can package it and store it till you need it, and when you need it, we can get it to you in a more efficient, in a way that's better for the environment. So whether it be by transporting by truck or by sea, these are things that are a lot better for the environment than shipping with a airplane. The other advantage with frozen, quality frozen seafood, and this slide, boy, if you can hone in on this, this is where it's at. You can harvest seafood pretty much all year round. So you look at cod. I just gave you 4 examples of species here: cod, haddock, Pacific salmon, and mussels. All of these species you can pretty much harvest all year round, with the exception of Pacific salmon, which you can only harvest from July to about October. But with a quality frozen seafood company, we are only going to harvest the seafood when it is at its peak. All right? If it's not at its peak, we just let it swim. And once it's at its peak and harvested and flash frozen, that moment in time is captured, preserved. So when you need it at your restaurant, you just pop it in the oven or thaw it out and use it to whatever creation you want to use it for. The beauty of, so take for example, PEI mussels. You can, if you're in the business of getting in mussels fresh every couple of days in your restaurant, you order maybe 10, 25 pounds of mussels. At a certain point in the season, when it's not at peak season, what's going to happen is those mussels, the shells look big, but when you open up the mussel is the size of a little pistachio, right? And it's very frustrating. Your customers are frustrated. You're frustrated. You can't figure out what's happening. Well, it's just not in peak season. The beauty of working with a quality frozen seafood provider is just that. We're only going to harvest the mussel when the mussels are at their peak. We flash freeze them, so when you need them, they're there all year round, but you get that advantage of peak season seafood. Only frozen seafood can provide you with that type of ability. Now, at Restaurants Canada, during the show, we were on stage, and while we were talking about this, we had some of the chefs that were supporting us were cooking all the seafood, and the crowd was able to taste the quality of frozen seafood, right? Unfortunately, internet has not allowed us to do that yet. I'm sure it's coming. I'm sure there will be a day where we can have this webinar and you can press a button and it's like Star Trek and you can taste the seafood. But until that time, you'll just have to take my word for it, and also look at this report that was done by the Center of the Food Innovation Center in Portland, the short form for that is FIC. They conducted a 2-day blind customer sensory testing survey to determine if customers could tell the difference between never frozen seafood and flash frozen seafood, cooked identically, and if so, whether they had a preference. And the chefs and technicians carefully prepared this for 150 applicants, or for 150 recruiters, and in an acceptability test which addressed the range of factors including appearance, aroma, flavor, texture, quality, overall liking, and purchase intent. In all categories, flash frozen fish was rated either as statistically the same or better than chilled fish. So even though I can't get you to physically taste this beautiful quality frozen seafood that is out there on the market, this report right here, and if you want to see the full report, just hit me up on best way to get a hold of me is through social media. On my Instagram account, just put in my name, Filman, and it'll come up. It's actually HLC Filman's Flavors, and we've got all types of stuff on there for you. But I'd be happy to send you this full report. It's a wicked document that really outlines the similarities between chilled fish and frozen fish. Another way that we like to demonstrate that we have some really superior, beautiful quality frozen seafood is by giving it to the chefs to work with for seafood for competition. So this is the World Chef Competition Qualifier, which was held at Humber College just a few months ago, and the chefs that win here go on to represent Canada at the World Chef Competition in Russia in 2020. And all of these chefs worked with our frozen Atlantic salmon sides and made some awesome creations with them. You know, look at the beauty that they've done here. And the point is, if these chefs are able to use this seafood to present to judges that are going to scrutinize every detail from texture to color to flavor, if it's good enough to serve to those judges, I'm almost 100% sure that is going to be good enough to serve to some of your pickiest customers at your restaurant, folks. Frozen seafood is definitely quality. And then you look at Restaurants Canada that just went by. The show featured the Garland Culinary Competition. And once again, we supplied our frozen at sea scallops for this competition. And you can look at the judges there. You've got, you know, Chef John Higgins, Brad, Donna. Like, it is an all-star lineup of judges. And these chefs were, boy, they were under the gun sweating it out. And I love this photo because look at the sear on that scallop. That's a frozen at sea scallop, and is no different than working with a scallop that it was unfrozen. They literally perform the same. And look at, I mean, just look at that. I want to eat that plate. Like, it's just incredible. So I definitely wanted to share that with you because I can't let you taste it. But that is one of the ways that we kind of cross that barrier when there's a chef community that is entrenched in just using chilled seafood. Then we'll do a blind test. We'll say, okay, here's some salmon cooked side by side. You don't know which one it is. Have a taste. Tell me if you could taste the difference. And always, our frozen at sea products outshine and perform really, really well. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information to dive into in a short amount of time, but I'll definitely just do a quick recap of the points that we just made, and we'll open it up for some questions, right? So the beauty of frozen seafood is that ability to select the exact cut, whether you want the loin, the center cut, or the tail, and the ability to order that in large amounts and in whatever species that you want. So you want 10 pounds a week or 1,000 pounds a week, not a problem, in whatever size or cut that you want. The ability to have those species available at their peak at any time in the fishing season. Cod is at its peak within March and August, and you want to serve a wicked cod dish in December, no worries, mate. We've got cod that was caught in peak season, preserved the moment it got on the boat. You've also got the ability to lock in that pricing. The price I'm paying for those 4-ounce cod loins, I want to lock that price in for an extended period of time. Absolutely, my friend, no problem. Frozen seafood can definitely allow you to do that. The ability to reduce your carbon footprint, we touched on that as well. and also the ability to reduce waste. I don't think I stressed this enough in this presentation. You know, by selecting products that go directly from freezer to the heat source to the plate, right? This is something that we touched on in our first webinar. So, you know, we didn't touch on it a lot this time, but if waste is a concern, frozen seafood is that solution, because we've got products that will basically, they never have to be thawed. And so when the customer orders it, that's when you cook it and that's when you serve it, right? And if you have products that you have to thaw out, at least you know that they were thawed, or they were frozen the moment, they were preserved the moment they got on the boat. So it eliminates the growth of bacteria. So when you thaw that product out, you've got an extended shelf life. So that is another benefit of frozen seafood. And of course, obviously, the quality. When frozen seafood is frozen properly within hours after harvest, it is as fresh as it gets. And, you know, before I open it up to questions, I just want to say for me, you know, the ideal restaurant is one that utilizes all of the resources available to them. So, you know, I'm not sitting here saying that you should only order frozen seafood. God, no way. Like, take advantage of everything that's out there for your establishment. So look at local seafood that is close to your restaurant. Look at wild-caught seafood that's caught sustainably. Look at frozen seafood, and look at farm seafood. Look at the whole entire gambit, and you leverage all of these resources to your advantage to help, you know, produce some profitable, memorable dining experience for your guests. Cool.
Awesome.
Right on.
No, that's great. You know, one of the things that I didn't know was the flash frozen and how quickly it freezes. I think that's pretty cool in terms of just the size of those machines. And you guys, and I guess, put them right on the boat.
Yeah, they're literally right on the boat. So an example of that is this image, like our frozen at sea scallops. Yeah, so from the time the scallops, the harvest is pulled in, depending on the size of the harvest, they're shucked on the boat, they're cleaned, and they're run through that tunnel freezer. And that process is anywhere from 1 to 2 hours, which is pretty incredible, right? You talk about freshness. To have a product that was literally harvested an hour ago at your restaurant is pretty cool.
So talk to me a little bit about what that means for consistency on the menu.
Oh, well, okay. So here's the thing, like when you are trying to produce a consistent menu, you want to have products that are always going to be at their peak. Like if you have a you know, haddock on your menu and you are just depending on what the boats bring in, like I said earlier in this presentation, there are certain times in the season when haddock is just not at its best. And same with cod. Every species of fish, there is a certain time when it's not at its peak. So the beauty of frozen seafood is you will always be assured when you're getting it from a quality supplier, you will always be assured that that product is going to be performing at its peak every time you use it, the same exact way. And then there's also the advantage of the actual cutting of the fish. Like once you're dealing with a really good seafood, quality seafood provider, in terms of the actual cut, like I just want that 4 ounce, I just want that 6 ounce, that 8.5 ounce, right? In terms of helping you not only deliver a consistent product, but also set your pricing, which is very key in terms of consistency. Just like it frustrates me when I go to a restaurant, it's like market price. Like no, let's how do you determine your profitability when you're constantly fluctuating your menu prices, right? It's good to lock in and have a consistent price, consistent product. Frozen seafood definitely gets you there.
That's a good point. Now, great. I'm a restaurant. I'm getting frozen seafood. I've made that decision because it's flash frozen. I know the quality, you know, can be similar. What about when I thaw it? How do I thaw it? Can that deteriorate quality? Does it keep it? What are the steps in order to ensure that consistency?
Right. So this is a great question, Roberto. You know, thawing seafood has to be done properly, or else you'll basically all those steps that were taken to ensure that you've got the freshest product. If you don't thaw it properly, you've hurt a lot of people that worked hard to get you that freshness, right? So to avoid that, what you got to do, the best way to thaw seafood is in the fridge. So you take it from the freezer, you put it in a perforated pan, and then you place it in the fridge. And then as it's thawing out, the moisture is going to drip away from the fish. That is the best way, the proper way to thaw out frozen seafood. It's usually depending on the thickness of the product. It could take anywhere from, it could take anywhere from 12 to 24 hours, depending on the temperature of your fridge as well. So if there's a little trick, if you want to, like say your night crew, once they're done cleaning up and they do a quick inventory of what's left after the huge dinner rush, and they realize, okay, we need, the morning crew is going to need some haddock thawed for the morning, and they'll do what I told you to do, but in the morning it'll still be frozen, right? Yeah. Still, it's depending on the quality of your fridge. So another trick that I teach is fish, when it's frozen properly, it has what we call a water glaze that enrobes the fish. It's a thin layer of water that protects the fish from the extreme temperatures of the freezer. It basically protects it from drying out, dehydration. What you want to do is run some cool water and just rub that water glaze, remove that water glaze from the fish before it goes into the fridge. Just run it under cool water until you'll notice when it's gone, because it won't be as slippery anymore. Like, it's like you've removed all the ice. Then you put it onto that perforated pan, and with a catch basin underneath to catch all the juices, and you put that in the fridge, and by the morning that would be completely thawed.
That's awesome. So by the morning, now I'm in a situation where I need fish fast. What do I do? Is there a proper way to thaw frozen fish in minutes? So maybe I can be a little bit more on demand.
Right, yeah. So this happened to me it's happened to every chef, I'm sure, working with frozen seafood. You do your best to anticipate service, and you look at the reservation book, you look at the weather, you do your best to pull out what you think you're going to need for the night, but then you get hit. All of a sudden that salmon dish that you created was too good. Everybody wants it now. Everybody's ordering the salmon. What do you do? Okay, so you're down to like 5 fillets now. The beauty of a lot of the really popular items that we sell at Highliner, and any quality frozen fish supplier would do the same thing. You're gonna individually vacuum seal the fish portion. So our salmon is individually vacuum sealed, because one of our best, one of the most beloved fish in Canada, Atlantic salmon. So when it's vacuum sealed, it doesn't need a water glaze. So that vacuum seal plastic wrap acts as the water glaze, and then you can, because it's vacuum sealed, you can put that directly in some cool water to thaw out. And with that technique, just fill up a sink or a bucket with some water, cool water, put the IVP, the individually vacuum sealed portions, into the water. 20 minutes, it'll be thawed out.
Oh, nice.
Okay, so that, as long as you've got 20 minutes, you can have some great thawed out fish. Now, what I've seen and witnessed is, if it's not individually vacuum packed, chefs will just throw it in water, warm water, and try to thaw it out that way. And boy, I tell you, that breaks my heart when that happens, because not only are you introducing more water into the fish, but you're not doing any justice to the fish by introducing more water to it. So you really, if you don't have vacuum sealed a vacuum sealer, or your fish isn't already vacuum sealed, what you can do is just use a Ziploc bag, place the fish into a Ziploc bag, press the air out, and then submerge it in water, and it'll sink to the bottom, and within 20 minutes it'll be thawed out.
Nice. Now, what if we go the other way? How do I store it?
Oh, okay. So what happens, obviously, we know that the freezer is extreme cold temperatures. So when you take a box of fish, open it up, pull what you need. Normally, that box of fish there's a plastic wrap that's surrounding the fish. Like, the fish is literally packed in a plastic bag, and you open up that bag to take what you need. The best thing for you to do is wrap that bag back. And I know this is like, it sounds very simple, but sometimes, cooks are in a rush. They tear open the bag, they take what they need, and they just close the lid on the box and just put it back in the freezer. Now the beauty is, of course, this is why we put that water glaze over the fish, because we know that things like this will happen. But if you want to really, really do a good job of storing seafood, every time that you open up that bag, just do yourself a favor and tie that bag back so that, the direct cold air doesn't get onto the fish and doesn't cause it to dehydrate. So as long as you're doing that, you'll be perfectly fine. Just every time you open it, seal it back.
Perfect. Just some simple instructions.
Simple instructions. You would say it's simple. Sounds simple, but it never happens.
Exactly. Yeah. Could I cook directly from frozen?
Absolutely. And the beauty, sometimes people will think that maybe if I cook directly from frozen, the outside of the fish is going to dehydrate before, will dry out before the inside is fully cooked. And that is definitely true if you're using like a dry heat method, like just cooking it in the oven. So what I find when it comes time to cooking fish from frozen, the best way to do it quickly and to preserve that natural texture of the fish is to kind of use a sauce to cook the fish in. So braising, braising or poaching. Those are really good techniques when it comes to cooking fish from frozen. Obviously, you can use sous vide as well from frozen. It's a great way to cook from frozen. It's just that when you're taking a fish that doesn't have any protection on it and just slamming it in the oven without any added moisture from frozen, sure, it can be a little bit tricky, but adding a little bit of moisture to it, whether it be a sauce to braise it in, be perfect for your frozen cooked fish.
No, that's awesome. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the, it's 2019, people are talking about different type of things. We're talking about sustainability. We're talking about, farm to fresh, farm to table, that sort of thing. When it comes to seafood, what are you seeing, considering you live it every day, as some of the trending seafood products or hottest seafood products this year? What are people demanding?
And this is a great question. I think people are tired of the same old, like same old salmon, and I think there's an opportunity now. You're starting to see chefs playing around with different species that you're not so familiar with, but are still fantastic. These are just some of the things that you would consider bycatch, and this is the movement that I'm seeing now. So keep your eye out for a fish called hake, H-A-K-E. This is a fantastic fish. It's a white fish. It's very mild. Takes whatever flavor you will give it. And not much people know about it. So it's really intriguing. You think about millennials that want to experience new things. So you put that on your menu and a little story behind it in terms of sustainability message and where it was caught and a little bit of profile in terms of its flavor. And you'll watch that just dance off. So I'm looking, that's the biggest thing for me right now in 2019 is those off catches, the species that are not so familiar, and using those in a different way.
Awesome. I think that's it for questions for now. I think we are in good shape here. The last question I had is when you invited me over for dinner.
Oh, right on, man. I hear you, bro. Like, man, now it's summertime coming, right?
Exactly.
So I tell you, this year, it's one of the first years that I'm going to be in the house that I just bought. We have a backyard. Finally, I've been, being in the city, I've been living in a condo and apartments all my life. So we finally got a house, my wife and I, my two kids. And one of my goals this year is to get a pizza oven.
Nice.
And once I get this pizza oven, boy, I'm not just making pizzas. We're going to use that ovens to roast fish, braise fish, smoke fish, all types of things. So yeah, you'll know it's me, man. You'll smell it. You'll come down the block, man. You'll smell this good roasted flavor, boy.
Awesome.
Come on by, man. I'll take care of you.
Well, I appreciate that, Philman. Thank you again. Right. That brings us to the end of the presentation. If you have any other questions or you think about anything else, please contact us directly, either via email or on social if you've been following along. But before you go, stay tuned for details on our next webinar from our Restaurants Canada research team on food service facts. The publication gets released later this month, so watch out for that in your email and in your mailbox as well. Until next time, thank you again, Philman. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you again.
See you later.